Gaming PC builds are back. And in this video, we're going to be putting together the ultimate price-to-performance gaming PC. And I know that might not sound that exciting, but this PC is going to be as affordable as possible, yet it can still play pretty much every single brand new title that comes out, not only at medium or low settings, but we're talking high to ultra across the board. This thing is no joke. As always, we're going to go through all of the parts that are actually featured in this build and tell you why they're here. We're going to go through the full build process so you know exactly how easy or difficult it might be to follow along at home, and of course give you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you know how this thing performs and ultimately whether it's going to be right for you. So let's jump into it after a short word from this video's sponsor. Gigabyte's Aorus range of AMD B550 and X570 motherboards are perfect for your next gaming PC. With a complete stack of the highest quality boards, Gigabyte has all of your needs covered. Supporting the latest Ryzen 5000 processors and PCIe 4, you're not only going to be gaming with sky-high frame rates, but are fully ready for the next generation of hyper-fast SSD storage. Get your build on today with Gigabyte Aorus. Check it out with that link down below. We got some good stuff on the desk here today, let me tell you. But we don't need all of it right now. Let's put some of this stuff away, including our RTX 3060 Ti. And something that is actually extremely exciting that we'll be revealing a little bit later in this video. It looks like a burrito. I promise you it's not. Unfortunately, I've not got that for lunch. It's just some leftovers. Sad times. But I assure you, if you're as nerdy as me, you're going to love what's inside here. We're going to kick off our build by talking about the platform that we're using here today, which is Intel. We're going for a B560, and this is actually a micro ATX motherboard. And it's a great value board. This is all about price to performance, like pretty much everything inside this system. But as you can see, it's still very well made and actually does look the part. This does support PCIe Generation 4 as well, so if you want to get an SSD at a later date that takes advantage of those speeds, then it is supported on the platform. B560 also supports XMP or memory overclocking, so if you want to throw some super fast RAM in here now or again at a later date, then you should be absolutely fine. The only thing to note is that this one is actually the Wi-Fi less board. You can pay around about £20 more and then you do get included Wi-Fi. This chip though is pretty special. This is the brand new 11400F. It's an i5 chip with 6 cores, so it's definitely not the fastest thing out there, but especially if you're playing at 1440p, I think this is a brilliant choice because you're not really spending any more on your CPU than you need to, and then all of that money saved essentially can go into your graphics card. I think, to coin Tesco's phrase, every little helps. And if you don't know what Tesco is, come to Britain, try their bread. It is phenomenal. It's just so soft. At this stage, you've probably had enough of the PC Centric jokes, so let's actually crack on with this build. And we're going to remove our CPU from the box. It's also worth noting that it does actually come with a stock cooler as well. And don't let anyone on Reddit tell you that these things are crap and you should never use them. Don't get me wrong, they're not good. But if you don't have a CPU cooler and you're trying to save money where possible, then just use this for a month and upgrade it later because it's not going to do you any harm. It's just going to be quite loud. The main things that you need to know about any motherboard really is that your CPU will go here. Your RAM are these slots to the right, and you want to use slots 2 and slots 4. Don't put them directly next to each other because you won't be getting dual channel operation. Our graphics card is going to go in this lower slot here. Our PCIe SSD slightly above it. You power the motherboard with this very large 24-pin ATX connector here. You can't miss this, it's massive. But then one that a lot of people will sometimes miss is this 8-pin for the CPU at the top. Addressable and non-addressable RGB are these little white connections you have here at the top. You've got USB for connecting things like maybe a fan hub, or if your case actually has USB 2.0, or use one of these things down here. USB 3 and USB-C are at the right-hand side of this board. HD audio is all the way to the bottom left. This is used to get your front panel on the case to actually do anything. If you want to plug headphones into your case, you need to plug this in to make sure that it will work. You've got the case power connections with these tiny little pins over here, and then when you actually want to plug in your fans, you use these fan headers, and they're usually labeled CH fan, which stands for chassis fan. But you also have your CPU fan right here at the top that you're going to plug your CPU cooler into. Let me know in the comments below, was that useful, or was it just PC Centric being too eccentric? Either way, open up your CPU slot by raising this little lever. Please don't touch the pins because I promise you, you will break this. Then you can grab your CPU. You find the little dot that's on the motherboard, line it up with the gold arrow, then gently lower this in place. Don't use any force whatsoever until it almost like sits or clicks in. Then you can just lower this little lever back down, and this cover then pops off and you know everything should work properly. You are of course going to need some memory or RAM, and here we've got some brand new stuff from Corsair. This is the Vengeance RGB Pro SL. It essentially just replaces the older version that was a little bit taller than this, so it looks the same. It still has plenty of RGB effects. Here we've got 16 gigabytes running at 3200 megahertz, I believe, but if you can get 3600 megahertz for not that much more money, it's probably what I would go for. Why do I end sentences like that sometimes? I don't ever walk down the street and go, "Hi Alex, how are you today? Are you okay?" It's my presentation voice and I don't like it. Don't laugh, joke's on you. You're the ones that are subscribed, right? Subscribe down there before I fall over again. So as we mentioned before, just open up slots 2 and 4 that are very helpfully labelled with this grey colour on this motherboard, and then line your RAM modules up. There is only one right way of doing this. Then you can start thinking about installing your SSD if you're going for PCI Generation 3 or 4. This is a Gen 3 drive. This is the Samsung 980. This is a great all-round option, and actually unlike a lot of Samsung drives, this one is very reasonably expensive. That's not what they'd put on the marketing. I suppose they'd say reasonably priced. Personally, I would get the 1 terabyte version though. So we're going to open up this top slot, as it is the one that has a heatsink, and if you were using a Gen 4 SSD, you'd need to use this to actually get full speed. Lower it down gently into place, making sure that the grooves are actually in all of the way. As alluded to earlier, we are actually using a dedicated CPU cooler rather than using the one that comes in the box. And I think for a build like this, you're essentially looking for something that does actually keep the noise levels down, obviously maintains great temperatures, but fundamentally you want something that looks good, because the stock cooler just doesn't. So something like this, which is the Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition from Cooler Master, is one of my favourites because it pretty much ticks all of the right boxes. It is a lot easier to actually install this if you do it on top of the motherboard box before you put this in your case, as you then can see a little bit better and you don't have to sort of like lug a big case around just to get to the bits that you need to. Grab the Intel backplate, lift up your motherboard, and then feed it through from the other side. Then you can take these little metal spacers that you get in the box and then just screw these onto the posts that have now come through from the other side. Then tighten them up with the included bit. Screw the Intel mount to the cooler itself. Add some thermal paste to the CPU in a little cross pattern. After which, the cooler will then just sit on top of your chip, and you can screw it down into those posts that you've just fitted. And there you should now have your completed micro RTX combination. You can see we've got a nice black theme going on here, but there's definitely a few accents. I actually quite like the tough theme on the motherboards. The bits of orange I think stand out and look pretty good. And then the fan itself you can put on in different directions if you want, but the stock layout, and the one that I would go for, is just to have it blowing out of the case from the right hand side. Just don't forget to plug in your RGB and the fan connector itself that goes into the port that's labeled as CPU fan. Now is the time to actually convert this into a proper gaming PC, which means grabbing our case. And this is from a brand I have admittedly never heard of before, Montech. I don't like that they've put this very big Montech label here. I understand that you do need to put branding on your cases, but I think that is a little bit too obvious, in my personal opinion. You might not mind. What this case is all about is airflow without actually costing you an arm and a leg. And I think it does look pretty darn good, to be honest with you. It's nice and clean at the front. We've got full mesh. You also have some ventilation at the top if you do want to fit a radiator. But the main thing really to note is that this is actually a micro RTX case. You do also have an addressable RGB hub on the back, which is really useful, so you're not going to have loads of cables going around like I've seen from cases like XPG. That is quite annoying. In the hard drive cage down the bottom, you'll find all of your screws and bits and doodahs. There's not really that much to report here. As I say, it is a more value-orientated case. What we're after first is some more standoffs to actually get the motherboard in the case, because unfortunately they don't install all of them as standard, which always annoys me, but I guess some motherboards don't need all of them. It is only 2 to add, one at the top and then this one down here. I would highly advise that you add some pliers as well for this bit and just give them a tighten. Then you can lay your case down flat, grab your motherboard and line it up with all of those holes and start securing it in place. Once you've done that, it should start to look something along the lines of this. Now is the time to start plugging in some of these cables that we mentioned earlier. USB 3 is blue, you can't miss it, and it is massive. It is just by that very big 24-pin RTX. We have USB 2.0 right down here at the bottom. And then it's time for those really pesky, tiny little cables that say power switch or HD LED. Is this tiny little block down here. Pressing on to our power supply, here we have the MWE 600 white. So this isn't a particularly high-end power supply. It's not modular, so you're gonna have to tuck the cables at the back and try and make it look as neat as possible. But we do have a basement, so I don't think that's gonna be a big deal. And the value that this actually offers is insane. I think you can get this for around about £50 or so. Make sure that the fan is facing downwards, and then just gently lower this in, and then screwing it in. And then now we can grab the most exciting part of any gaming PC. I know I always say that, but let's be real. It is the graphics card. And this is the RTX 3060 Ti, which, assuming you could go and buy any graphics card that you like right now, this would be the one that I'd recommend because price to performance is fantastic. This is a true next generation card, especially if you're going to use DLSS. But obviously times are a little bit weird at the moment, and getting hold of one of these is going to be very difficult. All we can say is that if you can't get hold of one of these, then you can at least get an i5 chip that has a dedicated GPU within it, which I suppose makes it actually an integrated GPU. And obviously the gaming performance of that isn't great, but it will at least buy you a little bit of time, regardless of whether it's weeks or maybe even a couple of months before you can get hold of the graphics card that you want, and you can play something like Valorant or something in the meantime. I made a video all about this. You can find it in the top right corner of your screen. You will need to remove one of these PCIe slot covers by bending it, which is like my least favorite thing in the world. But the reason that it comes like this is because it's then all part of the same bit of metal, and I guess it saves you a little bit of money. Oh, see, the problem is I've genuinely just broken a little bit off this motherboard now, trying to get this off. So I don't know whether this is going to work anymore. Why do people do that? Like, for real, a couple of resistors have just broken off the motherboard now because I can't get this out because of the terrible design. That is frustrating. What an absolute joke. Let's pretend that didn't happen and press on. It's now time to actually grab your graphics card, line it up with the top slot, and then you should be able to gently push this in. You normally get a nice clicking noise. That one wasn't very satisfactory, but it's definitely in. Grab a screw and secure it down so you don't get any horrible wobbling. And then normally with the Founders Edition, you'd have to use this horrible 12-pin adapter that looks like an alien. You plug it in at the top. I mean, this just doesn't look very good at all. However, our burrito is actually a proper replacement cable mod cable for the 12-pin, which finally means I don't need to use that adapter anymore. And I've got a couple. This one is actually for my personal PC. This is the black and white one, so it matches my theme. But I actually wanted to go for something a little bit different for these builds. So we have something that is a little bit more RGB. It will go with everything. And I actually think that looks really good. Every one of these cables is individually sleeved, which is why you can actually customize the color of every single one. You use the cable mod configurator. And then the other end, I've just got to be 2 8-pins. So let's plug this in at the top and then feed these down into the basement. Okay, taking a proper look at it, it definitely stands out. It is the center of attention as I look at that on the monitor. I definitely do appreciate that this isn't going to be to everybody's tastes, but that's sort of why I went for it. It's a show cable for a show build. What's not to love? Other than the fact that it doesn't really go with this system at all. When it's on though, you're going to have all of the RGB. I think it will look nice. Nice! So let's do just that and actually fire this thing up and hope it still works after breaking off a couple of resistors. I have faith. So here we are then, broken motherboard. Will we see success? Well, we do have some lights, which is definitely a positive sign. I know something on this board won't work properly now. I just don't know whether it's going to be so critical that the whole system won't boot. I think it will! I am an incredibly lucky boy right now because I was thinking that this was going to be a sad, sad end to this video. You'd come from the benchmarks, you'd be sad and disappointed. But actually, we do have a very good-looking gaming PC. Okay, it is a little bit plain and rectangular, but you've got to admit, this is a great-looking chassis. It's only really that minor issue, I guess, of the Montech logo, but then the much more critical one of actually having PCIe slot covers that I guess are just a little bit too long, and anything that can break bits off of your motherboard is really not a very good design. So if you do decide to buy this case, please remove them before you put the motherboard in. It's better for this to happen to me than you, because obviously you can learn from my mistakes. When you do make it into the BIOS, make sure you enable XMP to actually get your memory running at its proper speed. Then you can grab your USB drive that has a copy of Windows on it, plop this in the back of your system, give it a restart, and follow the instructions. And that is how to build and technically break a gaming PC. Here we are then, our gaming PC is up and running and ready to game. Shall we begin with some Apex Legends? As you can see, all of these settings are at absolute max, and we are actually running at 4K resolution. This is Arenas, which is pretty much brand new, and I've actually been really enjoying it. But I do wish that the games were slightly longer. 3 rounds isn't quite enough, but I imagine they're going to fix this with some ranked that's going to be coming soon. Let's turn this down to 1440p, and there is absolutely no doubt that this is definitely the sweet spot, not only for resolution versus refresh rate. If you're playing anything competitive, then genuinely it is going to help you convert your skill, I guess, into more kills and more wins. It's not going to turn you into a pro player overnight, but it's certainly going to help you to, I guess, just be the best player that I know you can be. That sounds incredibly lame, but I promise it is true. Next up, it's Call of Duty Warzone, and here we can also run 4K with DLSS, and our frame rate is actually very similar to Apex Legends. We're getting anywhere between 80 and 100 frames a second. Move on to 1440p, and the story gets even better. Now we're looking at around about 120 to 150 frames a second. So if you're lucky enough to have a Quad HD 144Hz monitor, then you really are going to properly saturate it and ultimately get the most out of your gaming experience. But especially with DLSS, these games aren't exactly the most difficult to drive in the world. So let's really up the ante, turn on some ray tracing with some Cyberpunk 2077. How close to the camera am I gonna get? The game really does look incredible when you get it at its best. This is 1440p with ray tracing, but as you can see, it definitely is quite a bit of a demanding title with around about 50, 45 FPS. To show you just how dramatic a difference ray tracing does have on the system, we will now turn it off, and immediately you can see that our frame rate goes up to around about 70 to 80 FPS. Having said that, this is the most demanding game that you can play right now, and it is running at 1440p. So realistically, your best bet might be to turn it down to 1080p if you don't mind, or you have one of those monitors anyway. Interestingly enough, the frame rate is pretty much the same as what you get at 1440p without ray tracing, so I guess your choice really is between resolution or all of that extra eye candy that you do get from turning ray tracing on. Which leads us on then to our final game, and one that I'm still not very good at as hard as I try, Valorant. As you'd probably expect, this is 4K absolute max settings, and as you can see, Valorant is not a very difficult game to drive at all, and we're skying it away, if that's a phrase, with 220 frames a second. Absolute madness, and the game really does look really good. Turn it down to 1440p, and you can see that increases even further to around about 250, 300 FPS. But I would argue that this is where we're starting to see a little bit of a limitation from that CPU. So if you're looking to grab a 360Hz monitor and you're maybe playing games like Valorant 24/7, then to be honest, you are going to have to spend more on a CPU just to achieve that higher frame rate. You can really see this when I turn it down to 1080p. Essentially the same as 1440 and actually not that far off the 4K results. This is a brilliant chip and it's great for pretty much all of the other games that we've tested, anything modern really, but if you're wanting to play something and really get sky high frame rates, as I say, aim for 360Hz, then you're going to have to look at something even higher end. But in terms of limitations, that's really not a particularly big one now, is it? I really do think that if you're looking for a price to performance gaming PC, you want to get maximum bang for the buck, then I think this has a lot going for it. Clearly the components that we've chosen here do go very well together. The only real complaint that I have, I guess, is with the case with those PCIe slot covers and the fact that that actually technically broke the motherboard. That is not good. But other than that, I don't really think anyone would not love to have this in their life. But what do you guys think of this? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think that the whole design is perhaps a little bit plain, or do you think that that lets the hardware do the talking? Do you like my power cable, by the way? I think that once it's turned on, it really does look pretty darn good, but I appreciate that it's probably not to everyone's taste. So I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in learning more about any of the components, including current pricing, then as always, you can find them linked down below with my Amazon affiliate links. And of course, while you're down there, start planning your next build with Gigabyte Aorus. Their boards not only offer fantastic value for money, but provide you with everything that you need for the build of your dreams. AMD B550 is perfect for price to performance gaming, whilst X570 packs in every feature a gamer could ask for. Check out Gigabyte Aorus motherboards today with that link down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.